I knew something in me had finally died when I watched Colin stroll back from his third 2-hour strategy lunch of the week. Salad in one hand, iced oat milk latte in the other, and not a single goddamn spreadsheet on his laptop. Meanwhile, I was on hour 9 of back-to-back Zooms, juggling 3 client deliverables, and trying to cover for a junior analyst who'd fled mid-shift with a panic attack. Colin's only contribution that day was forwarding my update email to the VP with his name at the top, and my name scrubbed like it was some embarrassing typo. By the time I finished cleaning up a data set that looked like it had been hit by a raccoon with Excel access, it was almost 9 p.m. The janitor had started whistling that one Bon Jovi song I hate, which, frankly, felt personal. I stood up to stretch, and there it was, Colin's empty desk. Still pristine, not a single post-it out of place. Just a sticky note from his daughter that read, "You are the best boss," in glitter pen. I wish I was joking. It's wild how quickly you become invisible when you're useful. People start assuming you like being the reliable one, that you prefer staying late, that you enjoy watching a grown man who once spelled synergy as synergy get lauded for work you lost sleep over. And sure, maybe I told myself, it's not worth the drama, just keep your head down. But deep down, I knew I was lying. Oh, and since you're here, let me drop something real quick. If you're one of the 97% listening without hitting that subscribe button, come on. It takes one click, it means the world to the team, and trust me, this story, you're gonna want to stick around for it. Anyway, Colin's the kind of guy who says, let's circle back instead of I forgot, who prints out your project plan, staples it, and slaps his name on the cover like he just discovered fire. I can't count how many times I watched him slither into meetings with my work on his screen, nodding like a bobblehead, while I sat outside the conference room running cleanup on a broken vendor contract or chasing down finance for late invoices. He was particularly bold with the latest project, cost optimization initiative I'd been quietly engineering for 6 months. Not the sexy kind of optimization with shiny dashboards and fancy buzzwords. No, this was the gritty kind, renegotiating supplier rates, realigning labor utilization, and identifying systemic redundancies that had been draining us dry. The kind of boring, unglamorous work that actually saves a company millions. The kind of work I do. When it finally all clicked, vendors onboarded. Automation scripts live, reporting structure locked, I sent Colin the final documentation. A tight, detailed report with projections, impact breakdowns, and implementation schedules. I even threw in an executive summary with bullet points because I know his attention span is roughly the size of a Fruit Loop. His reply, great stuff. I'll take it from here. No CC to the team. No thanks for the hard work. Not even a digital thumbs up. Just that sentence. The same sentence he used last year before he presented my supplier consolidation model as his own. I sat there, blinking at the screen. The office was quiet except for the hum of the HVAC and someone's leftover spaghetti nuking in the break room microwave. The smell of reheated tomato sauce and corporate betrayal filled the air. I could feel the familiar burn rise in my chest, not anger exactly. Not yet, it was older than that. A kind of bone-deep tiredness, feeling like, oh, we're doing this again. But this time I saved everything. Emails, Slack threads, version histories, even the timestamped vendor onboarding calls, all of which I ran personally using my contacts, folks Colin had never even met, much less emailed. I forwarded myself a backup of the master documentation, labeled the folder for taxes in case IT ever went snooping. Because here's the thing, I'm not loud, I'm not flashy, but I know how to build systems that don't just run, they remember. And Colin was about to find out that the quiet ones don't just watch. We archive. The minute I hit send on that final project report, I felt it, the same way you feel a storm rolling in before the clouds actually move. There's a weight to certain silences, and Colin's response landed with the kind of passive-aggressive finality that made my stomach twist. Thanks. I'll take it from here. That was it, no follow-up. No clarifying questions. No let's walk through this before the town hall. Just that bland, corporate execution note, like he was sliding a knife under a napkin. You ever watch a raccoon sniff a closed garbage can and know it's just smart enough to pry it open? That's Colin with my projects. Not clever enough to build a strategy from scratch, but real good at sniffing out when something's done, and figuring out just enough to slap his name on it before upper management gets wind. I stared at the email like it owed me money. This wasn't new. I'd watched him do it to Marcus in IT, took his work on a data integration script, and paraded it around like a magic trick. Or to Dana in procurement, when he regurgitated her supplier diversification proposal 2 weeks after shooting it down in a meeting. But Dana cried in the stairwell. Marcus drank too much at happy hour and made sarcastic memes until he got a written warning. I wasn't about to be either of them, so I took a breath and I got methodical. I started by printing out the email, not screenshotting, printing. I keep a private folder in my desk drawer with old HR documents and receipts. It's a relic of the analog age, but let me tell you something. Paper doesn't accidentally get wiped in a server migration. Next, I exported the slide deck metadata. Every edit I made, every timestamp, every file origin. Colin might be able to read bullet points, but he sure as hell doesn't know how to scrub mere data. Then came the Slack logs. I had at least a dozen back and forth threads with team members where we debated implementation strategies and documented the daily minutiae, cost estimates, workaround hacks, feedback from vendors. All of it done in public Slack channels, all of it traceable to my account. I even had a direct message from Colin himself where he said, and I quote, "I'll leave all the number stuff to you, lol. Now tell me, what kind of visionary architect of cost-saving genius uses lol to outsource financial modeling?" The last step was risk control. I started forwarding key documents to my personal email under the subject line insurance. Nothing explicit, no flagged content, just zip folders and innocuous file names. Budget revised final PDF, vendor notes personal use XLSX, that sort of thing. I even copied them to a thumb drive I kept buried in the lining of an old tote bag under my desk. I don't play. Because here's what Colin didn't know. The optimization model I created wasn't just a spreadsheet. It was a structural overhaul. It realigned 3 major budget streams, terminated 6 outdated vendor contracts, and restructured workflow delegation across 2 departments. It touched finance, procurement, operations, and legal. And this is key, it required every department head to sign off, which they did. In emails, tracked by Outlook, saved by me. What Colin thought he had was a flashy PowerPoint deck and a few talking points. What I had was a damn blueprint, tied to my name, my credentials, my relationships with people he didn't even know existed. He was about to present the tip of an iceberg he didn't build, while the whole frozen mass floated in my inbox. I wasn't planning revenge, not yet, but I was planting seeds, quiet ones. I even scheduled a meeting with myself on Outlook called Succulent Watering and Strategic Patience, because something was off. I could feel it. And this time, I wasn't going to let it slide. They dimmed the lights in conference room be like it was the goddamn Oscars. We had cookies on folding tables, lukewarm coffee in industrial dispensers, and a projector humming loud enough to drown out your thoughts. Classic quarterly town hall, 1 part forced celebration, 2 parts dry numbers, and a chaser of corporate gaslighting. I found a seat near the back, half hoping I could sneak out early under the excuse of a procurement fire drill, which is just code for hiding in the stairwell with noise-canceling headphones. But then Colin strutted onto the little riser stage like he'd just invented flavored toothpaste. "Excited to share something game-changing with you all," he said, beaming like a pageant dad. "It's a new cost optimization strategy we piloted this quarter, real breakthrough stuff. Radical realignment, scalable savings, truly a transformational vision. Transformational vision, my ass." And then he pulls up my slide deck. Not a version of it, my exact deck. Same title font, same stupid little gear icon I threw in last minute to make it executive-friendly. He had even left in a typo I'd meant to fix before sending him the final version, cost analysis with an extra E. That's how I knew. I stared at the screen while the blood drained from my face and pooled somewhere behind my ribs. Rage didn't come in hot, no screaming, no table flips. It was cold, methodical, like ice climbing up the back of my throat, 1 vertebra at a time. He was saying words I had written, but worse, he was mangling them, taking carefully balanced ratios and boiling them down to less spend, more win. He didn't understand a tenth of what was on those slides, but there he was, playing conductor to a symphony he didn't compose. And the CEO? Oh, the CEO was nodding along like a bobblehead on a dashboard in July. By the end of it, they handed Colin a shiny new title, Executive Strategic Advisor. No one knew what the hell that meant, but the applause was real. "Phenomenal initiative, Colin," the CEO said, clapping him on the shoulder. "Visionary leadership." I felt my hands clench around the disposable coffee cup in my lap until the lid popped off and scalded my thigh. I didn't even flinch, just sat there with a smile painted on like drywall primer while people around me clapped. Not one mention of me, not a footnote, not a whisper. It wasn't just theft. That was the part that hit me like a freight train 10 minutes later while I stood at the sink in the break room, trying to rinse coffee out of my skirt. This wasn't just Colin being a ladder-climbing parasite. This was fraud. Because he hadn't just stolen my ideas, he'd stood in front of the company and claimed authorship of data that triggered SEC disclosure thresholds. The moment he tied his name to those numbers, especially during a public-facing presentation with shareholder implications, he'd opened a regulatory sinkhole beneath his own feet. If I played this right, I wouldn't just get revenge. I could sink him. Maybe others too. It was like flipping a switch in my brain. I saw it all: emails, contracts, version control logs, the chain of custody that started with me and only me. Colin didn't realize he'd just committed career seppuku in front of the one person who kept receipts and read the compliance handbook cover to cover like it was a true crime novel. I didn't storm out. I didn't scream. I walked back to my desk, sat down, and opened a new folder on my desktop. Title: Operation Wipe that smirk off his face. Let the audit begin. The next morning, I walked into the office like it was just another Tuesday, poured my burnt coffee, nodded at Carol from payroll, opened my laptop. But behind the neutral blouse and dead-eyed professionalism, I was already sharpening knives, quietly, carefully, methodically. Colin had no idea I'd begun drafting his professional obituary. First thing I did was go spelunking through our Slack archive like I was digging for gold. And oh, did I find treasure. Thread after thread where I'd laid out cost models, sent spreadsheets, confirmed vendor strategy. Each message timestamped. Each one showing me making decisions, not Colin. There was even one glorious exchange where Colin asked, "Wait, what's the vendor's name again?" LOL, I keep forgetting. To which I'd replied, "The same one I introduced last month." They sent the revised contract to my inbox again, CC'd you this time. Oh yes, I was CCing. I had been CCing for months. My email outbox looked like a courtroom exhibit. Then I pulled the contracts folder. We used DocuTrack, a signature platform that logs who signed what, when, and with which permissions. Every cost-cutting deal had my login tied to the initiation. Colin had only clicked to approve the final version, if he even read them. Next came the version history of the optimization model spreadsheet. I opened the file in our shared drive and pulled up the full change log. 98% of edits, me. Last login before it was sent to Colin, me. Even the color-coded cells bore my formatting tags. But the crown jewel? Our internal project disclosure policy. Buried in the fine print of the finance section, line item 4.2.6 was the clause Colin had missed. Any executive communication of financial results or forecasts to internal or external stakeholders must be traceable to documented approvals from project originators. Noncompliance may constitute SEC-reportable misrepresentation. In normal English, if you present budget impact numbers as your own without authorization, and those numbers influence shareholder communications or financial projections, you've potentially committed securities fraud. And Colin had paraded those slides around like a damn carnival act, in front of the CEO, in front of the finance team, on a recorded live stream. So now I had motive, method, opportunity, and a mountain of proof. But I needed one more thing, a witness. Preferably one with subpoena power. Enter John Meeks. I met Meeks last year during a compliance training the CEO forced us all to attend. Most people were half asleep, but I remember him. Late 50s, gray buzzcut, black suit that looked government-issued. The kind of guy who says audit trail like he means it. After the session, he stayed behind for Q&A, and I asked him about vendor loophole disclosures. We talked for 20 minutes. He gave me his card and said, "If you ever see something that doesn't smell right, call me." Guess what, John? I smell something. I pulled out the card from my old notebook, still tucked between pages of scribbled logistics notes and a half-eaten cough drop. Dialed the number on my lunch break just to check if it still worked. He answered on the third ring, Meeks. I froze for beat. Then, "Hi, Mr. Meeks. You probably don't remember me, Patricia Delaney. We met at the compliance session last year." Silence, then Delaney. Operations? He remembered. "I think I have a situation," I said. "Something you may want to look at. Internal misrepresentation of financials tied to a company initiative. I have documentation." He didn't ask for details, just said, "Email it to me. Encrypted, subject line training follow-up. I'll take it from there." The adrenaline hit me sideways, not like fear, more like the rush before a controlled demolition. The moment you've double-checked the wiring and are holding the trigger. Back at my desk, Colin walked by whistling. Probably thought he'd gotten away with it. He was about to learn the difference between ambition and hubris. And I was about to teach a masterclass in professional vengeance, one spreadsheet at a time. I scheduled the meeting with legal like I was asking about 401k rollover options, not plotting the slow, elegant downfall of a fraudulent executive. I even brought a granola bar and wore a cardigan to really sell the confused but loyal employee vibe. "Just wanted to ask a few things, hypothetically," I said, smiling like a librarian. "If someone were considering a transition, totally amicable of course, what would the offboarding process look like?" I watched as the junior associate, a guy named Blake with too much hair gel and not enough suspicion, started explaining things like severance eligibility, exit interviews, and HR clearance protocol. I nodded, asked questions, even took notes on a yellow legal pad. But I also hit record on the app running quietly on my smartwatch. Because here's what people forget. When you're invisible for long enough, they stop thinking you're capable of strategy. They mistake endurance for passivity. By the time I walked out of that meeting, smiling like I'd just learned something fascinating about Cobra coverage, the seed was planted. I knew Blake would tell someone in HR, and HR would whisper to someone in ops, and eventually it would drift, like sewage through the pipes, right into Colin's inbox. It didn't take long. The next morning, I caught Colin peeking into my cubicle like a ferret that just heard a bear trap snap. He gave me this oily smile and said, "Hey, you got a second?" I gave him 3. He ushered me into a glass-walled meeting room, closed the door like we were about to discuss nuclear codes, and launched into a monologue so transparent I could have printed it on tracing paper. "Look, I know things have been intense lately. You've been crushing it, and I wanted to talk about, stretch opportunities. Stretch opportunities. God, what a phrase, like yoga for your dignity." He leaned forward with his "I'm your cool boss" voice and started pitching me on a project that sounded like corporate purgatory, realigning vendor ops in the Southeast region, reporting directly to him, of course. "It's a big opportunity," he said, trying to sound magnanimous. "Could be good for your trajectory here." He was sweating, actually sweating. I could see a bead roll from his temple down to his jaw like his lies were melting him from the inside. I kept my face perfectly still and nodded like I was thinking it over. Then I gave him the same response I once used to reject a guy who invited me to a monster truck rally as a second date. "No, thank you. That's it. No explanation, no emotion, just a clean, polite refusal. The kind that makes people wonder what you know." Colin's face twitched. He forced a chuckle and said, "Well, we'll circle back," like he hadn't just offered me a poisoned chalice. I walked out of the room with my back straight, letting him sit in the stink of his own panic. He didn't know what I was planning, but he knew I was planning something. That afternoon, I caught him in the break room pretending to stir sugar into his coffee while staring at his phone. My phone buzzed 5 minutes later. A "just checking in" email from him. Friendly tone, too many exclamation points. I didn't respond. Because here's what Colin was too dumb to realize: he'd already lost. The second he tried to bribe me with a fake promotion, the second he assumed I was desperate to stay, he handed me leverage I hadn't even asked for. Power's a funny thing. It doesn't always show up with titles and raises. Sometimes it's just the quiet thrill of knowing you're 10 steps ahead and your opponent is playing checkers on a chessboard you built from scratch. I went home that night, poured a glass of wine, and opened my encrypted file archive. One last check. Everything was in place. The knives were sharpened. Now I just had to pick the right time to slice. The resignation letter sat on my desktop like a ticking bomb I wasn't quite ready to detonate. I'd opened and closed it maybe 17 times. Changed the subject line from "formal notice Patricia Delaney" to "resignation effective immediately" and back again. Each time I hovered over send, my finger froze like it knew something my brain hadn't caught up to yet. It wasn't doubt in what I was doing. It was doubt in what would happen next. I'd built the scaffolding for this carefully, months of documentation, timelines, records, witnesses. And yet, part of me still feared the fallout wouldn't hit the right targets. That maybe I'd be the one buried under the debris while Colin got promoted again for crisis containment. And then there was Meeks. I hadn't heard a word since our brief call, just his instruction to send him the files when ready. But what if he ghosted? What if I'd misjudged him, misread that flicker of interest in his voice as something more than polite bureaucracy? I needed to be sure, so I did something I hadn't done in 15 years of corporate life. I asked someone for help. I messaged Meeks again. Asked if he'd be willing to meet for coffee, nothing formal. I picked a spot 2 blocks from headquarters. Not too close, not too far. Public but quiet, neutral territory. He showed up right on time. Same government haircut, same expressionless face. Just older, maybe more tired. I slid the sealed manila folder across the table without saying a word. He looked at it, then at me. "Tell me what I'm looking at," he said, so I told him. Not everything, not with fire and brimstone. Just the skeleton, the project, the stolen attribution, the public presentation, and the disclosure clause Colin never should have touched. I kept my voice even, my tone dry, like I was explaining a system bug or a delayed invoice. He asked 2 questions. "Were you the originator of the cost projections? Do you have proof?" "Yes," I said, "all of it." He nodded once, tucked the folder into his bag, and stood. "You'll hear from me soon." That was it. No promises, no high fives, just professional silence. I watched him walk away and tried not to throw up my chai latte. Back at the office, things were shifting. I could feel it in the air, thicker, heavier. There were whispers in the hallway now, glances that lingered a little too long. Someone in finance bumped into me and said, "Hey, just FYI, Colin's been asking around. Said he's thinking of moving your team under procurement next quarter." My team, my analysts. The ones who trusted me to fight for their promotions, who came to me when Colin forgot their names in status updates. He was consolidating control, prepping the narrative, making moves like a man who sensed the tide turning but still believed he could outrun the wave. That night, I reopened the resignation email. I changed nothing. I didn't reread. I just stared at the blinking cursor and whispered, "Not yet, but soon," because walking away wasn't the price. Walking away was the trigger. And when I finally pulled it, I wasn't going to walk, I was going to ignite. The morning I pulled the pin, the sky was gray in that way that makes buildings look like tombstones. Fitting, I thought, corporate weather for a corporate death. I arrived 15 minutes earlier than usual. No one notices when you're early. They only notice when you're gone. My desk was clean. My folders backed up. My personal effects already boxed the night before and waiting in the trunk of my car, sandwiched between a snow scraper and a carton of protein bars I never touched. I logged in one last time. Opened Outlook. Drafted the subject line without hesitation. "Resignation Patricia Delaney." The body was as dry as sandpaper. "Dear team, please accept this letter as my formal notice of resignation, effective immediately. I have appreciated the opportunity to contribute over the past 14 years and wish the organization continued success. Regards, Patricia Delaney." No tears. No nostalgia, no thank you for the memories. This wasn't a goodbye, it was a power move written in Times New Roman. Then came the CCs. HR General Inbox because protocol. My direct team lead, Julia, she deserved to hear it with the rest. And last, John Meeks at Secure Comply and Sorg, I hovered for half a second. Not from doubt, from gravity. Like when your foot hovers at the edge of a cliff, not because you're afraid of falling, because you're about to jump and you know you won't be the one hitting the ground. Click, sent. Just like that, the detonation began. No dramatic exits, no slamming doors. I simply shut my laptop, powered it down, and slid it into its docking station. Then I stood up, grabbed my coat, and walked out of the building without a word. I passed Colin's office. He was on a call, pacing in that performative way he did when pretending to negotiate. I didn't look in. Need to? By the time he read the email, I'd be halfway across the park, sipping mediocre coffee from a food truck run by a guy who thinks everything tastes better with cinnamon. My heart wasn't pounding with panic. It was pure adrenaline, clean, euphoric, high-octane freedom rushing into my bloodstream after 14 years of white-knuckling. I didn't check my phone. I didn't watch for replies. I let the silence breathe, knowing that back at headquarters, someone was opening that email right now and reading all the way to the CC line. That line was the real payload. The soft, polite language was camouflage. The resignation wasn't the message. The message was who I trusted to hear it. 3 names, one of them a bomb. I stood at the edge of the park, wind whipping past the collar of my coat, watching the leaves swirl like debris from a controlled demolition. And I smiled, because I wasn't watching the building burn. I was just waiting to hear the sirens. Monday morning hit like a wrecking ball dipped in bleach. I was still in bed, half listening to the weather report drone on about scattered showers and commuter delays, when my phone lit up like a slot machine jackpot. Julia 7:41 a.m. What did you do? Brian from Analytics 7:43 a.m. Collins locked in the main conference room with legal. Not allowed to leave. Security walked him in. Anonymous number 7:50 a.m. CFO just canceled his vacation. Caribbean, non-refundable. Whole thing's a mess. I didn't reply. I just scrolled, sipped my coffee, and watched the fire spread. 10 minutes later, a former team member sent me a screenshot of an all-company calendar invite. Emergency all-hands mandatory time. 10 o'clock a.m. location. Conf. A, B, and overflow Zoom host. CEO Colin hadn't even made it 72 hours. Turns out, he tried to delete his email history first thing that morning. Problem was, our IT infrastructure auto-syncs with the audit server every 12 hours. And better yet, I had submitted immutable, time-locked versions of every relevant file to Meeks, complete with cryptographic hashes and metadata logs. So when Colin thought he was erasing footprints, all he was doing was digging a deeper crater. I imagined him standing over his laptop, sweat beading under his overpriced button-down, clicking permanently delete on Slack threads and Google Drive folders, while legal stood behind him with their arms crossed like disappointed babysitters. One of my favorite messages came from Carol in payroll. She always played sweet but knew where all the bodies were buried. Carol 8:12 a.m. You didn't just burn the bridge. You nuked the Fing interstate. I laughed so hard I nearly dropped my toast. Later that morning, Meeks sent a brief confirmation. No greeting, no fluff, just all received. Internal review opened, external notice pending. Translation, the fuse had reached the dynamite. Word on the grapevine was that the CEO wasn't just furious, he was scared. Not because of Colin's incompetence, but because of what it revealed. A systemic failure of oversight, a risk to investors, and a potential SEC inquiry that could get very expensive very fast. And all of it tied back to that shiny little title they gave Colin during the town hall, Executive Strategic Advisor. The one they announced publicly. The one linked to those fraudulent projections. The one that turned a smug PowerPoint into a legal liability. There's a reason people like me read policies like bedtime stories. By noon, Colin's parking pass had been revoked. He wasn't officially terminated yet. Rumor was he was placed on administrative leave pending investigation, which is HR speak for we're building the gallows but haven't picked the rope yet. I walked past my old building around 1 p.m., just to see. From the sidewalk, you could see the shadows pacing behind the frosted glass conference room walls. The CEO's assistant stood frozen outside the door like someone guarding a vault of radioactive shame. I didn't go in. I didn't wave. I just stood across the street with a coffee in hand, watching the fallout with quiet, surreal satisfaction. Because here's the truth, I didn't leak the story to the press. I didn't trash the company on social media. All I did was tell the truth to the right person at the right time. The system did the rest. And as I walked away, the only thing I thought was, it's amazing what happens when you stop protecting people who wouldn't throw water on you if you were on fire. The CEO's face on the company-wide Zoom call looked like it had been rinsed in skim milk. He wasn't wearing his usual fake casual quarter zip or doing his forced chuckles. He was pale, stiff, and reading from a script he definitely didn't write. Effective immediately, he began, his voice flat. 2 members of the executive team have been suspended pending external audit and regulatory review. There was a beat of silence. like the entire company was holding its breath. Colin Radley, executive strategic advisor, has been removed from all operational responsibilities. This action is not a judgment, but a precautionary measure during an ongoing compliance matter involving financial disclosures presented at the recent quarterly town hall. He didn't say my name. He didn't have to. Every analyst, every manager, every intern who saw Colin take credit for my work knew. You could practically hear the collective holy shit vibrating through the company's Slack channels. And then came the real gift. Later that afternoon, while I was sitting on my back porch, nursing a lemonade and letting the sun warm my knees for the first time in what felt like years, an email landed in my inbox. Subject: Request for Voluntary Participation Regulatory Inquiry sent from CEO at Parallax Holdings Com CC. John Meeks at Secura Compliance.org. Dear Miss Delaney, we are reaching out to formally request your cooperation in an ongoing investigation into financial misrepresentation and internal policy violations. Your name has been referenced as the project lead on materials previously attributed elsewhere. We would appreciate your assistance in ensuring a complete and accurate understanding of the facts. Please find attached a calendar link to schedule a time convenient for you. Respectfully, Michael Renner, Chief Executive Officer. I didn't open the calendar link. I didn't even open the attachment. I just sat there, sipping my drink, listening to the birds argue in the hedges, letting the satisfaction settle into my bones like a long exhale. 14 years in that company. 14 years of being the reliable one, the cleanup crew, the credit ghost. The one who stayed late, who skipped vacations, who smiled through being steamrolled. They tried to erase me. And now their system, the whole damn structure that let Colin rise like a fart in an elevator, was cracking at the seams because I stopped holding it up. One email, one CC, that's all it took. I booked a flight that night, somewhere with sand, no cell reception, no Slack. The only calendar I planned to open for the next 2 weeks was the one the resort gave me for spa appointments. And as I closed my laptop, I smiled, not because I burned the place down, but because I finally realized I never had to set the fire. I just had to stop putting it out. You're the real MVPs of the office jungle. Thanks for watching. Smash that subscribe button, or the coffee pot might just forget your next brew.